When I was about 12, my great-uncle John came from Ukraine to visit us in Canada. He had a lifetime of stories, but one in particular always sent chills down my spine. It happened in the late 1960s. John was traveling by train from his village to visit relatives in another town. At one point, he had to change trains and found himself dropped off at a small, isolated station in the middle of nowhere. The platform was nothing more than a weathered wooden hut, surrounded by endless dark forest. A dirt road disappeared into the shadows, twisting between trees like a hidden serpent. The wind whistled through the bare branches, carrying an icy bite that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. Not a soul was in sight. The station felt abandoned, as if the world itself had forgotten this place. Hours passed. The sun had long disappeared, leaving only a dense, oppressive twilight. Cold seeped into John's bones, and worry gnawed at his mind. Where would he sleep? What would he eat? That's when a figure emerged from the shadows. A small, hunched old woman, appearing almost impossibly from the gloom. Her presence was sudden and silent, yet it carried a weight, a sense of purpose that made John's stomach tighten. She asked if he was waiting for a certain train. When he nodded, she said it would not be arriving until the following day. She offered him a place to stay, a meal and a room at her house about an hour's walk through the forest. John, exhausted and hungry, gratefully accepted. The path through the forest was darker than night itself. The trees stretched upward like long skeletal fingers, their branches scratching at the icy wind. Shadows moved at the edge of his vision, though he knew it was only the trees. Still, a creeping sense of being watched gnawed at him. The old woman walked ahead, quiet, her silhouette shifting in the weak glow of the lantern she carried. By the time they reached her small two-story home, John's legs ached and his stomach growled with emptiness. Inside, the dim glow of oil lamps illuminated the room. She served him hot borscht, the savory aroma temporarily masking the unease curling in his chest. And that's when he noticed. She wasn't a woman at all. It was a man, disguised with clever clothing and age, his face lined, yet expressionless. John didn't have the energy to pry further. After eating, John was led upstairs to a tiny room containing a single bed. The door clicked shut and was locked behind him. Silence enveloped the room. He called out, but there was no answer. Anxiety pressed down on him like a physical weight. He needed to relieve himself and crawled under the bed in the dark, hoping to find a chamber pot. Instead, his hands encountered something cold, heavy, and horrifying, a body hidden beneath the bed. Panic surged. The window was nailed shut. He realized that if he stayed, he would almost certainly die. But breaking the window might alert his captor. There was no choice. With trembling hands, he lifted the body onto the bed, covering it with the blanket, and slipped under the bed himself, barely daring to breathe. Hours passed. He heard slow, deliberate footsteps climbing the stairs. The lock clicked. The door creaked open. Shadows moved across the dim light spilling from the hallway. Then came sickening, bone-chilling thuds. Someone was bashing the body with a large crowbar. The sound echoed through the tiny room like a grotesque percussion of violence. The crowbar clattered to the floor, and silence returned. The footsteps descended the stairs, fading into the distance. When John finally emerged from under the bed, he seized the crowbar and quietly pried the window open. He tossed his suitcase out first, then climbed through himself, not caring about the height, only about what was behind him. He ran blindly into the field beyond, heart hammering, eyes darting from movement in the darkness. The forest seemed alive with whispers and shadows. Every snap of a twig made him jump. Finally, distant lights revealed a highway. Military and transport trucks offered salvation. He flagged down a ride to another village where he could safely catch a train. He never reported the incident. In the Soviet Union at the time, even the victim could have faced punishment. He simply thanked God for his survival. From that night onward, John never traveled alone, never trusted appearances, and never forgot the cold, dark forest, the footsteps, and the hollow eyes of the man who had almost claimed him. Even now, decades later, the thought of that night still sends shivers down his spine. The forest, the darkness, and the quiet horror lurking just beyond the light. He knows it could be waiting for anyone careless enough to trust the shadows. This all began about 2 weeks after I bought my very first home in December of 2010. I was 22 years old, and for the first time in my life, I was living completely alone. The thrill of independence was intoxicating, but it was accompanied by a gnawing unease that I couldn't quite shake. The house was quiet in a way that felt almost unnatural, the kind of silence that presses against your ears and makes the walls feel closer than they should. It was exciting, terrifying, and overwhelming all at once. About 9 or 10 days after moving in, my mom and sister convinced me to visit a local animal shelter. They had spotted a cocker spaniel in rough shape, a thin, abused former breeding dog with severely matted fur and a jittery, skittish demeanor. Something about him tugged at my heart. I brought him home that same day and named him Jack Donnie. 30 Rock fans out there would understand. At the time, he was a little, fragile thing, weighing only 12 pounds, suffering from worms and wary of human touch. He had clearly been mistreated for most of his life. I had no idea that less than a week later, this tiny, fragile creature would prove to be my absolute lifesaver. The house I had purchased wasn't in the safest neighborhood, though it backed up to an elementary school playground and had a few security cameras pointing directly toward the backyard. I figured that offered at least a small sense of protection. It was a couple of days before Christmas, and my office was closed for the holidays, leaving me home alone in a house that already felt strangely eerie during the long winter nights. The layout of the house was odd. My kitchen table sat right by a window that overlooked the front porch. Standing on the porch, you could cast a shadow across the blinds. The front door was at a 90-degree angle to that window. Across from the kitchen was a second living area, with a side door that had a half window attached, the only window in the house without blinds. I was sitting at the kitchen table, casually sorting through my mail, when a shadow passed over my bills. My stomach immediately tightened. Even with the blinds down, it was clear someone was far too close to my window. My body tensed as an instinctive chill crawled up my spine. I didn't know why, but something about this felt wrong. No one should have been at my door, and I hadn't heard a car or been expecting visitors. Quietly, I slipped off my stool and crouched down, peeking through the tiny gap in the blinds. That's when my heart nearly leapt into my throat. 2 men were standing on my porch. The first man was huge, easily over 6 feet tall, broad, wearing a white t-shirt and jeans. He had his back to me, facing my front door, making it impossible to see his face. The second man was smaller, wearing a red baseball cap and an absurdly oversized red shirt. Unlike the first man, I could clearly see his face, though that didn't make him any less threatening. For a fleeting second, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they had a legitimate reason for being there. A few days earlier, someone claiming to be a neighbor had come by looking for a lost dog. Maybe this was something similar. But then I heard the bigger man mutter something under his breath, a phrase that sent a spike of terror through me. Red-shirted guy turned and disappeared from view. I leaned left, craning to see where he went, and my blood ran cold. He was moving toward the side door, the weakest point in my house. It was old, flimsy, and had single-pane glass from when the house was built in 1955. If he wanted in, that door was his easiest entry. And just as that horrifying thought hit me, both men started pounding on the door simultaneously. The sound of their fists striking the door reverberated through the house, shaking the walls and rattling my nerves. I froze, unsure of what to do next. And then, out of nowhere, Jack erupted into action. That tiny, abused cocker spaniel, who had flinched at every noise in the days since I brought him home, completely lost his mind. He let out the most ferocious, blood-curdling snarl, baring his teeth, and tore across the room toward the side door. His barking was relentless, echoing through every corridor in the house, while his claws scraped against the floor like nails on a chalkboard. I had never seen him act like that. In an instant, the timid little dog had transformed into a fierce protector, ready to defend his home and me. I could hear red-shirted guy yelling in panic, "Holy, she's got a dog!" followed by hurried footsteps. Within seconds, both men bolted, disappearing into the night like shadows fleeing a storm. I stayed frozen for a long while, my heart hammering, my hands gripping the kitchen counter until my fingers ached. Jack, still tense and growling, stood at the door, waiting for what would come next. I didn't sleep much that night. The next day, I filed a police report. Unsurprisingly, I never heard back, and as far as I know, those men never returned. I ended up moving out of that house in 2015, but I never forgot that night. More importantly, I never forgot what Jack did for me. I firmly believe he saved my life. If he hadn't been there, if they hadn't heard him, those men likely would have made it inside. I was alone, young, and my house had glaring weak points. Jack has been treated like a king ever since. He is the gentlest, sweetest dog in the world and even loves children. He has never shown aggression toward anyone, except that one night. But I know, deep down, he recognized me as his person the moment I brought him home, and he would do anything to protect me. So, to white shirt and red shirt, wherever you are, let's never meet again. Because Jack is still here, and I have the distinct feeling he hasn't forgotten you either. If you ever return, you'll find that the small, timid dog you once underestimated is far more terrifying than you could imagine. When I was 11, I experienced one of the most terrifying moments of my life, an event that still sends shivers down my spine every time I think about it. It was around 9 o'clock at night on a storm-lashed, rainy evening. I was home alone with my little brother, who was 7 at the time. Our parents had gone out, and it wasn't unusual for us to be alone for a few hours. We shared a room at the front of the house, right next to the front door, with a large window facing the street. The blinds were wide open, and the rain fell in relentless sheets, hammering against the glass like the drumbeat of some ominous signal. We were quietly reading, our little world safe and insulated, until the doorbell rang. The sudden chime made my stomach drop. I wasn't expecting anyone. My parents would have returned only through the garage or with keys. They never rang the doorbell this late. I looked outside, expecting to see their car, but all I saw was darkness, pierced by the heavy rain. Then I heard knocking, and a man's voice called out. At first, I didn't recognize it. At that age, the only male voice I knew belonged to my father, but this wasn't him. The man claimed he was selling Girl Scout cookies. My heart sank instantly. Who would sell cookies in the middle of a storm at night without a single child or box of cookies in sight? I froze, watching him from the side window near the door. A man in his late 50s, soaked from head to toe, standing there alone. The chill crawling up my spine told me that nothing about this was ordinary. Our front door had 3 locks, but none were engaged. My hands trembled as I reached for each one, hyper-aware that he could hear me moving the deadbolt. He continued knocking, repeating the same line over and over, like a predator testing the water. My mind raced. Should I call the police? Should I shout? And then a horrifying realization hit me. Our bedroom light was on, the blinds wide open, and my little brother was completely visible from the window, utterly absorbed in his book. I turned toward him, and my blood froze. The man was no longer at the door. He had moved silently with a predator's precision. He was standing directly outside the window, staring in. My heart pounded in my chest like a drum of terror. He wasn't glancing. He was locking eyes with the only person he could see, my little brother, blissfully unaware of the danger mere inches away. Instinct took over. I flipped the light switch off and bolted to the window, slamming the blinds down as fast as I could. For a split second, in the dim glow of the storm, I caught a glimpse of his face. It was blank, calm, almost unfeeling, like he wasn't startled at all. Once the blinds were down, I ran through the house, checking every lock, closing every blind, every curtain. I instructed my brother to hide in a large closet in the middle of the house, a windowless space, without telling him why, because panic would have been disastrous. I stood in the hallway, listening. The knocking had stopped. The voice had stopped. Only the relentless rain filled the silence. I couldn't tell if he was still outside, wandering, waiting, or simply watching from somewhere hidden. For some reason, I didn't call the police or even my parents. Shock rooted me in place. I convinced myself that if I stayed quiet and still, he might leave. I don't know how long I waited. Eventually, I forced myself to check. The man was gone. No car pulling away, no footsteps, nothing. Just the rain. To this day, I don't know what he wanted. I can only guess that it wasn't cookies. He had likely been watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. If I had hesitated even slightly, if I hadn't noticed him at the window, if I had failed to lock that door in time, he could have stepped inside. and I don't want to imagine what might have happened. That night changed me forever. Since then, I have an almost obsessive need to check locks to make sure every door and window is secured. But what haunts me most isn't that he was there, it's how close he came. The only thing that stopped him was a few seconds of awareness and quick thinking. Those seconds saved my brother's life. And that realization, that tiny margin between safety and disaster, is a terror I carry with me to this day.